Welcome back, everyone. And before we go into our next panel, we've got an extra special treat for you all. We have a live poetry performance from Melbourne-based poet Zainab Farah. So Zainab is a Somali spoken word artist based in Nam, aka Melbourne, and her pieces explore intricate experiences and topics that she's passionate about. Zainab has performed on various platforms around Melbourne and is the 2019 Victorian Australian Poetry Slam champion. And she's got two pieces that she's going to perform for us today. The first called Survival and the second called Boxes. So please welcome Zainab Farah with her two amazing poetry pieces.
Thank you, Candice, for that lovely introduction, and YSS for having me today. I'll just get right into it. On Harmony Day, you marvel at my cuisine and compliment my attire. You're ready to celebrate me and everything that I contribute to society, yet as soon as tragedy occurs, you're quick to throw me in the line of fire, quick to paint me criminal, dangerous, violent, quick to scribble me out like an error that doesn't belong, quick to deem me a liar. See, they say when you see injustice, you've got to call it out, stand up, speak up. But how do you find a voice as high and then refusing to come out and knock senses into people? When every new tragedy is an arrow pierced in healing scars, how are you meant to recover when chaos forces your wounds to gape open just as they're about to seal shut? How do you stand up to defend yourself when you're swimming in an ocean and your shoulders are anchored down by crimes attached to you unwillingly? How do you stand against the enemy when your own skin is the monster that haunts you? What do you do when your own skin feels like a threat, a target? How do you learn to slowly crawl out of a booby-trapped body? A body you once used to call home, ally, but now I'm not sure where you belong. What do you do when the flesh that was placed on your body for protection and the scarf you wore in pride are turned against you into weapons that taunt and question you? How do you tiptoe behind and follow a system that's designed to suffocate and erase you? When you're told to rise in a court ruled by white supremacy, what pleas of innocence do you put forth when your existence, your every breath is the crime? What words of reassurance do you whisper to your beating heart when pain and sadness evict joy and laughter? See, now life is no longer about living, it's all about survival. I will worry like worn out wool and keep prayers sewn to my lips like clothes clinging to thread. And the sad thing is now, every time I look in the mirror, I too look at myself with questioning, doubtful eyes, and a voice in the back of my mind whispers, maybe they see something that you don't. Maybe they're right. Thank you. I'm going to be doing the second piece, and this piece is titled Boxes. Boxes filled with books, boxes filled with clothes, boxes filled with pain, and boxes filled with memories you try to erase. Like items you move around, rearrange, like items you pick out when you need, like items you store away for tomorrows that never come. You boxed me in walls laced with ignorance. You had the nerve and audacity to take away my individuality, a fingerprint that was mine alone. You took away the one thing that made me unique. All in the name of what? All in the name of story. Tell me what good is a story that's fabricated to draw lines that divide and separate? What good is a story that fuels anger and uproot hate? Please, I'm curious to know, what have you gained from your 2 minutes of fame, and what worth did it have compared to flashing my life down the drain? Our legal system states that everyone is innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But I guess that rule only applies to some, for in my world, innocence is a luxury we are yet to receive. In my world, you are guilty until proven innocent, and proving your innocence is as hard as reading when you don't even know your alphabets. It's hard as driving a car when the only car you've driven came with a remote. It's as hard as flying a plane when the only plane you've flown was made out of paper. So now I am forced to become a lawyer, forced to become a defendant, constantly on the front line proving myself. Now stages have become makeshift courtrooms where I plead my case in, peeling away at the layers of skin I've developed as a guard, sharing stories of my joy, anger, pain, and displacement, hoping, praying that the jurors that fill the room conclude that I am not, have not, and never will be a criminal. Thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Zainab. I wish that we could give a round of applause, but there's not a lot of us in the studio, but if we can hopefully, you're all clapping there with us at home. That was incredible. Thanks so much for joining us today, Zainab. Hi, everyone. We're now ready to get into our next panel, The Voices of Young People. So I'll be introducing our two guest speakers who are here today. Navo Zisson is a queer, non-binary Jewish writer, performer, activist, and public speaker based in Nam, Birrarunga, Melbourne. They run workshops in schools and professional development trainings in workplaces around transgender identity and language. Author of award-winning Finding Nemo, a memoir on gender transition, and contributed to Kindred, a queer Australian young adult anthology. They are a mentor for the Pinnacle Foundation, one out of Australia's 30 under 30 for 2019, an ambassador for Wear It Purple Day and the Victorian Pride Centre, as well as a member for Gender Euphoria Cast, Australia's largest all-trans and gender-diverse show on main stage. Afi Akwe is a 23-year-old South Sudanese woman currently working as a registered nurse in mental health facility. Also the director of Twitch Women's Sewing Collective, a social enterprise which aims to train women from non-English speaking backgrounds and provides them with job opportunities. She is passionate about social justice, mental health awareness, and intersexual feminism. She's also run workshops and sessions around educating people on different types of racism and how it can affect people sometimes over generations. They will be in conversation today with YSAS's own youth advocate, Tamlin Collins, who's currently working on a project around stigma and discrimination. Her interests include young people having their voice heard, along with equal rights for all. So please welcome Nevo, Afi, and Tamlin for today's panel on the voices of young people.
I think you might just jump straight in with questions. Nevo and Afi, tell us about your journeys into advocacy work. Might start with Afi first.
It just came naturally for me growing up. I've moved from Sudan to Egypt to Australia, and I've seen what injustice can do to people. So it was very much sort of in my blood, I guess. Even my mother is she's an advocate for people. She loves to help the community. So I think I was just surrounded by that need to help others that it just, sort of fell into it naturally, I guess.
So you've recently become a marriage celebrant. Can you tell us a little bit about this and what made the move to include this work in your already broad repertoire of incredible skills and what it means as a young advocate?
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think becoming a marriage celebrant was necessarily like a step in activism so much. I mean, I guess in some ways I don't necessarily want to I don't necessarily want to get married and it's not, it's not something that I really seek within my own life, but I guess when marriage equality was all sort of happening and how much trans people were thrown under the bus, I just kept thinking about what that would mean for trans people accessing weddings in the future and whether they would be misgendered by their celebrants, whether they would have to lie about their lives and their lifestyles. And, I wanted to do more public speaking things in the future, but I didn't always want to talk about my own story and my own trauma. I wanted to be able to center someone else's story and also to center love. There was a really beautiful thing that Mama Alto said a few years ago at the Midsummer Extravaganza, where she said she can't explain how beautiful it is after so many years of singing at protests and funerals to be singing at weddings now. And that's something that really resonates for me, is I think we spend a lot of our lives in resistance and in protest and in mourning. And I also want to surround myself with celebration and with love.
That's a really interesting concept. Like, as you said, you personally wouldn't get married yourself, marrying other people. So I find that quite interesting. Yeah. Maybe you might change and you might find someone in the future.
I don't really believe in that. I'm non-monogamous and I date multiple people. I don't think there is a one person out there for me, at least. I think there's lots of people and love is infinite. But yeah, maybe. I just don't really believe in the hierarchy of marriage as the most important kind of relationship. I think that all kinds of relationships are really important. But that's just my take.
You to have. Awesome. So Afi, I'm going to ask you the next one. You are not only a registered nurse, but also the secretary of Twitch's Women's Sewing Collective, a social enterprise run by migrant women for migrant women. Can you tell us a little bit about this collective and what came about it and how you, as a Black woman entrepreneur, have sought to carve out this space?
It's a big question.
It was a mouthful.
Well, I'll start off by how Twitch Women started. It was started by my mother, and she made me this outfit. It's pretty nifty. So she came to Australia not speaking any English at all. So it was difficult for her to find jobs. But she's a tactile learner and she loves to do things. And she found that sewing was one of her hobbies. So she did a Certificate 3 in clothing production, which then, helped her get a job, and she was making clothes, and she really enjoyed the experience. So she thought she would help other women and give, other women of color this space to be able to, learn at their own pace and to be able to do something and learn something in an environment that's safe and where they don't feel pressured, or where they can, speak their broken English without, feeling shy, or, having that fear, which is, it's really difficult for a lot of women or a lot of people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds when you're put in an environment where you feel like you have to speak good English, whatever that means. And
Speak good English.
and so they sort of shy away from talking and shy away from experiences that could be valuable to them. So that's how my mum started Twitch Women, and she created the space for women, and it's been really great. And at first I didn't get into it because I was still in high school when she started it. And for a few years I was like, oh, I don't know if that's for me. I'm not really a, vocal person. I don't want to do all this advocacy stuff. And then eventually I got into it and I was like, wow, no, this is really a great space. And I think it's been quite a journey since then. And, obviously have ups and downs, and you go into all these different spaces and you sort of navigate and grow as a person, and you sort of start, to learn all these different things about all these spaces. So it's been an incredible journey, and I'm still carving out my experience and myself in this world, I reckon.
Yeah, that's amazing. As being a registered nurse as well and doing a lot of advocacy work, and does it take up a lot of your time?
Yes, it does.
That was the next question. Yeah. So I'll ask you this one first as well. So in both your journeys, so I'll go with Afi first. There's been many challenges, but also many strengths and celebrations of success. What has been a key challenge, and how did you overcome it?
Right. There's a lot of challenges, but I think a key challenge would be other people's perception of you. That's always really hard. And I think even from a young age, other people had this perception of who I should be or what I should do or how well they expect me to speak English, and all these things that people had already sort of guessed about me before I even got a chance to tell them who I was. And so I feel like, all my life I've just been trying to prove to other people that I'm not who they say I am, or that I'm not, this perception you have of Black people or of Sudanese people, and no, I don't speak the same language as that other Black person, and all these things where, just constantly battling this people's perception of who I should be as a Black woman or as a Sudanese woman, or as a nurse, just, who I should be.
So it's like labels and stigma and even discrimination as well just come hand in hand.
100%.
You can't even say, this is who I am. Don't judge me. Don't judge a book by its cover, Have a look on the inside. What about you, Nevo? In your journey, there's been many challenges and strengths as well. What has been a key challenge, and how did you overcome that?
That, the way that we understand transgender identity now in 2020 is really different to when I first came out in 2013, which wasn't even that long ago. But, I was in year 12. I had no representation of transness in the media. I didn't really know that trans men existed. I certainly didn't know that non-binary people existed, and I couldn't imagine a future for myself anymore. And I think that that's the problem when you've been strategically and consciously erased from the history books, which we've seen happen with so many different kinds of populations, especially within this country. It becomes really impossible to imagine what your potential is. And so you have so many people with such big potential that don't get to actually embody that or even imagine it because of the discrimination that they face, whether it's, ableism, fat phobia, racism, white supremacy, transphobia, or homophobia, and all of the other versions of discrimination as well. And so I guess that was probably the biggest challenge for me, is not really knowing what I was capable of and like what my future could look like. And I think that that was why it was really important for me to write my book, because I wanted to write myself into existence and I wanted to become the person that I never had growing up, so that young people could look to someone and know that they can accomplish their dreams and they can be who they want to be. And obviously there's, you know, privilege in that, and access to certain opportunities and resources, which isn't necessarily accessible to everyone. But yeah, I think setting that example was something really important for me. And yeah, I think representation is just such a key thing, because people won't imagine themselves into certain roles or into positions of leadership or really anything if they don't see themselves represented back to them.
Awesome. I really like that one there, the representation that you have come out with. So like that was a big issue to overcome, and you faced many different difficulties in your life as well. But yeah, representation, I like that one. That's a good one. I'll stick with you on this one, still Nevo. There's been many issues in the representation of young people in the mainstream media. What do you feel are the key issues and the best way to counter to respond to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because often the people who are writing our stories are not us. So you've got people who don't really understand the nuances and the intricacies of transgender identity or LGBTIQA plus spectrums in general, and they're the ones writing those stories, and they're casting the wrong people. And so I think consultation is really important, and that's some of the work that I do as well, is consulting with people on how to most ethically create LGBTIQA plus characters, having sensitivity readers and actually paying them their labor, and going over some of your storylines, hiring and casting trans people, and this is applicable across all sorts of marginalized identities, right? It's like actually paying people for their emotional labor and hiring them for the jobs that they are the most appropriate for, because, you know, we have like really high unemployment rates within transgender communities. And then when cisgender people take our roles, take our jobs, do our consultation work for us, do our allyship networks, do all of those sorts of things, the diversity and inclusion corporate structure, it becomes really difficult, because it's like, well, we're struggling to find work as it is, and now you've got all of these roles that are specifically about catering to our community, and you're not hiring us for that either. So I think that is definitely applicable to the media and to the ways that young people have been represented. And I think, you know, through the total disaster of the kind of safe schools stuff that went on in this country, and then the plebiscite, like the media has certainly not been on our side and has really taken the opportunity to attack trans people, and especially trans young people. So I think coming together communities and creating our own representation and our own role models and ways of future imaginings is sort of the best and most powerful thing that we can do, and to also rise up in the ranks of the media so that we can create those stories and we can make those things front and center.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Like, we don't have enough young people representing what we need in the future, and we just have a bunch of older people talking about young people, not even within the demographic or anything. They have no lived experience or anything, and they're just like, yeah, this will work perfectly for this person. And it's just like, well, why don't we bring in a lived experience, or someone that's within this diverse range or within this sexuality group, you know? So it's just like, it's a bit hard, but, you know, I think, yeah, definitely making that change is just the right way, and rising up through media would probably be a good one as well. I'll jump to you.
Yeah, and we need to value lived experience as if it is skills, you know, and as if it is qualifications and credentials, because it is. It's not just lived experience, it's lived expertise. And you can study those things as much as you want, but if you don't actually have that lived experience and you don't live within that politicized body, you're never going to understand what that is actually like.
Yeah, no, never will. That's why every workplace should always have a lived experience worker or a youth consultant or any, like a consumer consultant, whatever they need, just someone that's had that lived experience. So even if it's for workers going to that young person or to that other worker and asking for information about the group or what's best to work at. Because I know as a youth advocate here, I get asked a lot of questions about how do I approach young people about this? Or is this a good way to ask young people this? And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, no, sometimes I'm like, yes. But it's always, it's good that YSS has done this though. I might jump to you, Afi, now on this one. So you know how many issues in the media and the misrepresentation of young people in the media. So what do you think are the key issues and how would you counter or respond to them?
I think there's a lot of issues with the media. I'll say that first of all, especially in the last, well, I mean, it's been ongoing for years, but in the last few years, there's been all this African gangs and this representation of young African people, especially young African men, throughout the media, and it's been, you know, devastating to the community. And I definitely felt the effects, even just going on public transport and, you know, being in public spaces, I could feel the change and people would look at you differently. And I've had people come up to me, you know, asking questions like, why are these, you know, African kids doing this? And I'm like, I don't know every African child.
I don't read
But
that.
yeah, and it's just this misrepresentation and this racial bias where they're happy to, you know, showcase 3 African kids in a shopping center and be like African gangs and they must be stealing, they must be doing this. But if there's, you know, 3 white kids doing stuff, it's just, they're just adolescents or they're just being delinquent. And it's the use of language that differentiates and splits people up and turns it into, you know, this big hysteria and causes people to panic. And it's an unfair thing. And yeah, so I have a lot of issues with the media. But in terms of like even representation on television shows and, you know, any movies or whatever, I know in Hollywood it's getting there. But in Australia, there's like no representation. And, you know, you switch the TV on and there's Neighbours or Home and Away that have been going on for like 3 decades and there's like no black people on there. Where did the black people go is my question. And it's concerning because it doesn't represent us as a society. If you go into anywhere in Melbourne, there's so many, you know, people from different cultural backgrounds, and then you switch on the TV and you don't see that representation. So who are they really representing on these TV shows if it's supposed to be, you know, lived experiences and all these live shows and you're supposed to relate with these characters? Well, how can, you know, half the population watch it if they don't even see people that look like them on TV? So I think, you know, things like casting more black people, casting, you know, more diverse people, and people that actually represent, you know, the actual country would be a start. And, you know, the media getting accurate information, which is, I know, impossible because when do they ever? But yeah, and just not targeting people and actually fact checking before you put things out because it can be detrimental and it can harm people's lives. And it's, yeah.
The negative way, the way that the media portrays stuff as well, people just believe it. Like someone will read something in the newspaper and it's just like, oh, that must be true. No factual evidence at all, no peer-reviewed articles, nothing.
And it's even worse for people who don't live near, you know, any culturally diverse people, or people live in the country and they've only met like one black person in their whole lives. And then they see all this stuff on the news about black people doing this and black people doing that. Of course they're going to believe it because that's all they're exposed to. And then, yeah, it's damaging.
It is damaging. And I don't know what we could do to get the media to stop misrepresenting young people, young people of colour, anyone really, into like even a positive aspect. Like I would love to be able to read on, say, 7 News or 9 News, a very positive article about a young person of colour or anything that's done positive change. But no, you just see this person's done this person's done that, and then all these comments about, oh, who lets their kids do this? And it's just like,
I don't even go to the comments section anymore.
I think
It's
if I just
terrible.
want to get mad, I'll do it, but I shouldn't.
It's horrible because it's people that wouldn't say it to your face. They're all keyboard warriors and they'll just type all these things and they have no idea how much it impacts a young person. You know, talk to young black people who have read these comments, and you know, they're in tears because there's comments like, you know, calling them monkeys and telling people to go to their back to their countries, and half of these South Sudanese youth were born here. So I'm like, what is, like, how long do we have to stay in Australia before we're considered Australian?
I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. Maybe Navo, do you have the answer?
Oh, sorry. I don't think I do have the answer. No, I'm not really sure, but I definitely resonate with the anger that is felt, you know, and it's hard sometimes to, I guess, like try to educate and try to be really patient when people don't want to learn and when they actually don't respect who you are and that you have a different lived experience in the world and try to speak as if they understand. I think that's really challenging. So yeah, I don't know if I have the answers either.
So yeah, social media has amazing potential for advocacy and great impact. We can see from the media that it hasn't had the best impact. But how can we create sites of discrimination and risk becoming the echo chamber of certain views? How do you see social media hygiene? I'll ask you this one first, Nevo.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that social media, you know, it's an amazing platform for organizing and for activism and for education. I think that I've learned so much about the world from social media, especially when, you know, a lot of those kind of frameworks of thinking, when we talk about anti-racism, when we talk about transphobia, all sorts of anti-oppressive practices, a lot of the language sometimes around social justice is very academic and very inaccessible to a lot of people. And so I think social media has made it a lot more accessible with bite-sized little slideshows and tips and tricks on how to do this and what not to do. And, you know, as well for organizing protests and for actions, like social media is really incredible, but at the same time, it can just as easily be really detrimental. You can get so much into doom scrolling and just scrolling through all of the worst news in the world for hours, and then afterwards sort of being like, why do I feel so crappy? And then you realize that you've just internalized and marinated in just the worst things in the whole world. So I think, you know, there's a lot of different aspects of social media hygiene that are really important to keep in mind. And when I talk about social media hygiene, I'm obviously not talking about like having a shower with your phone. I really don't recommend doing that. But just, you know, being aware of what you're consuming and how much you're consuming it, whether you have timing, like have a timer on how much you're on social media. And then I also think like looking at the kind of content that you're consuming. So when talking about diversity and we're talking about marginalized bodies, you know, like, do you always have the same people on your Instagram feeds? Are you only ever looking at the same kind of bodies that are always like white and skinny and straight and cisgender? Are those the only representations of beauty that you're internalizing? Because that will then mean that you project that idea of beauty and those sort of Western standards of beauty onto other people and to yourself as well. It's really hard to access self-love and self-compassion when you're only seeing the same kinds of people on your social media all the time, and that's not including you. And so something I did recently, or actually a few years ago now, was a big overhaul of my social media where I stopped following a lot of people who did before and after photos, for example, you know, of like losing weight or something, which is just really fat phobic. Like there are people who will always be the after, there are people who will always be the before. One is not inherently more valuable than the other or morally more good. It just feels kind of crappy to see that all the time. And so I sort of did an overhaul, and now I follow a lot more fat people, a lot more people of color, a lot more trans people, a lot more disabled people, and a lot more different representations of beauty, so that I actually see myself represented when I'm scrolling through my Instagram and not just this unattainable standard of beauty that is determined by the Western or the white supremacist media in this country. And so I think that is a really helpful tool, as well as kind of really overhauling what you are consuming.
So like recommending for, don't look at the things like say you want to be, look at what the things that you are, and so you're not, and that might be a good way to, you know, hygiene your social media or something, and using less time on say Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all that jazz.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. That's amazing. I think I might have to put that into act as well. I'll jump to you for this one as well, Afi, now. So what do you think about social media? So we know it does have the amazing potential and impact, but it also can create sites of discrimination and risk, becoming the echo chamber for certain views. So how do you see social media hygiene?
Yeah, I think social media's it's sort of a tough one because you need to sort of have a certain amount of followers to be able to get your word out there and to implement change and to be able to actually get your voice out there. But it's also hard to get the followers because people depending on what space you're in, people just want to see all the fun stuff. No one wants to talk about the tough stuff. No one wants to talk about mental health. No one wants to talk about all these things. And so it's about finding the right space where you can talk about those things and where your followers are engaged and wanting answers and they want to talk about the same things as you. Yeah, it is hard. And I think it just takes time to sort of create that following and to find your voice on social media. And I think I probably need to do some social media hygiene and get rid of some people.
Yeah. I found that this year was a good year for social hygiene in deleting people. Definitely for myself there, but it's social media it does have the potential, to create great impact, but it does, get matter on your following base and how many people you can influence with it as well. But what advice would you provide to workers and young people about social media hygiene?
Just watch the space you're in and make sure you're following people that sort of have the same values as you and are saying things or doing things that you want to see, but also challenge yourself and go outside of your comfort zone because you might actually learn some new things, and don't always be open-minded to learning new things because you can over on social media, and there's lots of issues that we probably don't even know about or we've probably never thought about, and you might find more information on those things. So just have a broad sort of spectrum of what you want to see on social media and engage with different people as well, and people from different backgrounds. And if you engage with the same people, it's going to be the same stories. If you only follow people that are in Melbourne or in Australia, all you're going to hear about are the same things and the same issues and the same concerns. But if you sort of broaden that and follow people from other countries and people going through different experiences, then it sort of broadens your experience and it helps you understand different communities.
Yeah, that's fair. What about you, Nevo? What advice would you give to workers and young people about social media hygiene?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I can't properly hear.
That's all right. What advice would you provide to workers and young people about social media hygiene?
I think, the things that I said before, like being aware of the amount of time that you're spending on social media and the kind of content that you're following. I think also just like a lot of different tools and tricks for self-care outside of social media, like reminding people that, what you see on social media is not necessarily what's true in the worlds of those people, and that we put the best versions of ourselves onto social media. But the reality is that we are all living with really complicated mental health and different challenges that we're interacting with that we might not be super honest about on social media. So if you're looking at other people's lives and thinking, oh, I wish my life was like that, I wish I had a perfect dog and a perfect family and was able to cook these perfect meals and whatever, you have to remember that there's heaps of burnt meals that aren't taken photos of, and that maybe that dog also ripped up the entire living room before that photo, or that relationship that you're seeing that's so perfect is maybe also really tense and potentially even harmful and toxic. These are things that we don't actually see on social media. So just remembering that there's a whole other picture that you're not getting, and that someone's social media feed is curated and it is in some ways artificial, and so keeping that in mind and not aspiring to lives that are not your own. It's better to check in with yourself about what you need and where you want to be in the world, rather than comparing yourself to others, and also to inauthentic versions of other people as well. It's not the truth. It's just the best version that they're representing.
Thank you, Nevo. I really enjoyed that answer there. I think that's something that everyone should probably take into impact, and for workers and for young people about social media hygiene. The same there, Yafi. So Navo, your online advocacy covers many issues and concepts, connecting particularly with young people. Recently, you reposted some amazing content around size discrimination and body image, an intersection which is often overlooked and under-discussed, and intersects heavily with our over areas of marginalisation, particularly for the LGBTIQI plus community and the QTPOC folks, especially young folks. Can you give us some insight into discrimination and thin privilege and how this might be affecting young people to work with?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that like I can definitely speak on this a little bit in the kind of content that I consumed on social media and the ways that I felt fat phobia in the world impact on me. But I also really urge you to seek out activists in this space and especially fat activists and particularly cutie pock fat activists. I think there's a lot of people in the online space who are speaking about this that have way more authority to do so than I do. But I think for me, it's really important to repost that stuff and to be talking about it because I see so much fat phobic language, especially in lockdown, of people talking about like, oh, I'm going to put on so much weight or whatever, and not understanding that like there are people in the world who exist at different sizes and that one size is not inherently more moral or even healthier than other sizes, and that there's these real myths surrounding body image and body weight and nutrition and all this stuff that we just keep reproducing these really harmful ideas. And you can be unhealthy at any body size and shape, and you can be healthy at any body size and shape. And I think that it's really important to understand the diversity of body size in the world. And as I was saying earlier, you know, like having before and after photos can be like a really harmful thing to actually share with the world. And I guess like I just think about it a lot because, you know, I see it especially like in trans circles as well, of sort of before and after photos, not necessarily around weight, but around transition. And it's like, I think that sometimes we create this narrative of before and after that isn't actually true, and that we are always before something and we are always after something else. And so I much prefer to talk about how that was then and this is now, but things aren't linear. They are really non-linear, and your body weight is going to fluctuate throughout your life, and that your body image relationship is going to fluctuate throughout your life, and that thinness doesn't equal happiness, and it doesn't equal a good connection with your body, and that is something that you have to work really, really hard on in a, you know, mental health kind of way and not just a physical health way. And that's why, you know, accessing therapy and also accessing role models who look different and have different body sizes can be really helpful in that. But yeah, I think talking about that stuff is really important because fat phobia is everywhere and it's still so much a part of our world, and we don't even realize sometimes the way that we speak about it and the way that we integrate it into our language. So yeah, I think it's something that needs to be spoken about more and considered more, and especially frontlined by fat people and by their world experience and their lived expertise.
I have a question as well. Is it wrong to, I don't know if this is the right question to ask, is it wrong to say fat people, or is it just like, because I know when I speak, I don't like to word things wrong, and I don't want to, you know, like hurt anyone's feelings or anything. So I don't like when people call me skinny. So would it be wrong to say call people fat as well, or determine them as like fat people?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, like, I don't think that I'm the right person to speak on it necessarily. I wouldn't refer to someone as fat unless they self-identified that way. But I think from the sort of activism that I've seen around body positivity and fat positivity is that like shying away from using that word is actually harmful. And, you know, like that we need to talk about the word fat, and that being fat is not inherently problematic or bad or wrong. And that word has like become so taboo. I've seen a lot of fat activists say like, yeah, I'm fat. And then someone's like, no, you're just big boned, or no, you're chubby, or you're this or you're that. And they're like, no, I'm fat. And like, that's a word that I use for myself. And I want you to sit in the discomfort of that. So that's just some of the stuff that I've read and that I've understood from fat activists. But again, I wouldn't go up to someone on the street and be like, oh, what's it like being a fat person? Like, I think that that's inappropriate, and I wouldn't really do that for any identity or any way of being. So I think learning more about this space and about fat phobia, and I think taking the power out of that word a little bit as a slur and trying to understand what it means and that it is not an inherently bad thing or is not a moral judgment either. Yeah, that's sort of some of the stuff that I've learned about a little bit.
That's great. I like that view on it because it's not necessarily like using in the context you'd use it. You wouldn't go up to someone and be like, "Oh, hey, you're fat." Like that's not the right thing. You know, like the same as like, "Hey, don't go up to someone like, hey, you're skinny," or "Hey, you're this or you're that." I'm like, well, you think I'm blind? I can see what I am. So it's a good way to say that. You know, if they identify as that, then yes, like that's great then. But that was more of a question from my view because like I'm a little unsure, like, what should I do? So if someone identified, like, said, hey, I'm fat, and I'm like, all right, sweet, I'd call you fat, sort of thing.
Yeah. I think it always comes down to autonomy and, like, who is projecting those labels. And if someone self-identifies as something, like, even, for example, with the word queer, like, I've called myself queer many times, and then I've had people say, like, oh, that's such an offensive word, I'll just call you this. And it's like, no, you don't get to decide what I call myself. I call myself this, and you can call me that too, but you don't get to pick my own labels for myself, because part of my resistance and part of my autonomy is choosing my own labels. And so I think that also comes down to this. Like, if someone calls themselves fat, I'm not going to reword it and choose a different way to speak about them, because that is their autonomy and that is their consent. And I would be taking away their power if I chose to use a different word for them from what they are identifying as.
Yeah, no, that's a good view. I like that. So I'll jump to you, Afi. What's your views on language? On this kind of language.
So my view, in terms of like saying the word fat,
Or just maybe in the way, like how we're saying it as well. Like if someone say identifies as that, would it be okay to still do that? Or like, what are your views on this kind of language?
I think people, it depends on how you approach it and how you're saying it. Because I agree with Navo, you know, fat isn't a negative word. Like, you are or you aren't. Like, it's not, you're not saying you're a terrible person because you're fat. But if someone says, you know, you need to exercise more because you're fat, then you're like, oh, you're not my doctor. And I think people give themselves permission to comment on people's bodies and give unwarranted advice. You know, I've had people comment all the time and say things like, oh, have you tried this diet or have you tried that diet? It's like, yeah, I've read about it, but like, I like food too much. It's just, oh, it's so sad. It's terrible. I live a terrible life just eating what I want. It's so horrible. And like, people are just like, what? Like, she actually wants to be this weight? I'm like, is that, like, it's none of your concern. It's like, you're not carrying me around all day, so I don't see why it would concern you. And it goes the same with, you know, when people comment on skinny people and they're like, oh my God, you haven't eaten, or you haven't this, or you haven't that. And I think in terms of like medical conditions, like, you don't know what someone is going through, and you don't know in terms of mental health or their physical health, you don't know what a person is going through. And there's many different conditions that can cause someone to gain weight or lose weight, or all of these things that unless you're a medical professional, you wouldn't know. And so it's not your place to comment. You shouldn't be saying, you know, people need to try this or try that, because for all you know, they could have, you know, starved themselves the whole day because they're trying to be skinny or trying to fit your perception of, you know, what someone should look like in society. And you've just, you know, said that to them, and now they're not going to eat for the rest of the day. Like, you never know what someone is going through. So don't comment on people's bodies unless they come to you for advice. If you're a medical professional, then that's different. But if I'm just, you know, at a party or at a celebration, like, don't come up to me and be like, oh, have you tried this? Or maybe you shouldn't have worn that belt, or maybe you shouldn't wear this. But yeah, and unfortunately, I've gone through it my whole life from like a very young age, and people just feel the need to comment on other people's bodies, and it's unfortunate, and it needs to stop. And I think it starts with calling people out on it. And if someone, you know, says something to you or to a friend, or if it's your friend that's saying something about other people, I think that's even harder to call out friends or family when they're talking negatively about other people and about other body images. That's where we need to learn to, you know, say, no, that's not your place to say. And I think one of the biggest examples, one of the greatest examples would be Lizzo. And you know, people comment on her weight all the time, and it's all over media, and people are like, oh, she's so overweight and she's so this. And I'm like, you try singing and dancing for 2 hours without going out of breath. And she does. She'll sing and dance and run around for 2 whole hours during an entire show, and everyone's like, eh. And then she'll eat a chocolate bar, and everyone's like, oh my God, that's so terrible for her. She's so unhealthy. And, you know, she's probably healthier than most people. Like, you don't know what is healthy, really. You don't know. Unless you have someone's blood results, you really don't know.
Yeah, unless you're that medical professional that's telling them, yeah, no, we don't need these labels or people coming up to anyone just asking these questions. But as you said, calling it out, how can we do that? How can we call people out, like, just like, hey, that's wrong? And
Yeah. Just, I mean, if you feel safe enough and you feel comfortable enough to tell someone not to comment on other people's bodies, or even if it's, you know, on social media and someone makes a comment about a friend or about anyone, just, you know, telling people to shut up and mind their business, and that other people's bodies are none of their business. And yeah, it's really not.
Nevo, how would you call out stuff like fat shaming, skinny shaming, any of that? How would you call it out?
Well, I think what's really important is when you're calling out an issue that doesn't directly affect you, it's really important not to appropriate anger. And that's something that I've really had to learn the hard way sometimes. I get really angry about issues that don't directly affect me, but directly affect the people I love and people that I care about. But it's not actually helpful as an ally or as someone who isn't directly affected to get angry, because it then ends up falling on the community that you're supposedly standing in solidarity with or trying to help. And so I've really learned that that's the best way to approach those things, is actually approach them with patience and with time and with empathy, and say to people like, I totally get how you felt that way, or that you are at that stage in your life, because I felt exactly the same way, and let's talk about it and let's figure it out together, and not trying to just really tear them down. I mean, if it's about transphobia, I probably respond quite differently, but when it's about issues that don't directly affect me, like racism and fat phobia and ableism, it actually is my job to delicately explain those things to people, and not say like, oh, just Google it, or like, you know, you're really crappy for not knowing this thing, but actually taking the time to explain it and to share resources and to pull it up. But I think it is really, really important to say something so that it doesn't always fall on the backs of the people who are directly affected. And so if you hear someone make a comment, or they're talking about diets, or they're talking about, you know, anything that is just related to this, you can be a bit more wary and be like, hey, do you mind if we don't talk about that? Or like, can I have a chat with you about this idea? It's something I've been thinking about lately, and I'm trying to change my own language, or something like that. But really positioning yourself on their side in a way of sort of being like, let's learn about this together, rather than getting angry, because then they're more likely to become defensive. But if it is an issue that directly affects you, you can react and respond in whatever way you feel it's like your right to do so.
Yeah. No. Thank you both for your responses there. I'll jump on to the next question. So, Afi, you're also a registered nurse. Can you speak to us a little bit about your experiences of working as a young Black woman nurse in Melbourne and during the midst of a pandemic? And can you give us some insight into health and intersection with race and age?
Yeah, it's definitely been a tough year, as we all know. I work in mental health, so I haven't, you know, directly been affected by COVID or looked after any COVID patients, but we have seen, you know, an influx of people coming back into the mental health system because of the restrictions and because of the isolation, and not being able to go to groups that they regularly go to, or being able to socialize with people, has had a really detrimental effect on people's mental health. So it's been a rough year for everyone, but especially worse for people who already had mental health issues, and yeah, they've just an influx, and it's really sad because people are isolated and they're not able to get to certain supports that they used to get to, and even just seeing friends and family and people that they would normally turn to. So it's had a really big effect on people's mental health. And I'm, lucky enough I haven't been on the front lines to deal with COVID, but we have, all felt the effect of it.
Yeah.
And in terms of the intersection with health, race, and age, I think I think that in terms of the health system, with any system really, there's bound to be racism because it was created by white people for white people, and now you're getting all these people of color trying to get supports and to get help, and in a system that's not really catered to them, and I think people, especially people who can't speak English or people who struggle with English, it's really hard to get supports in terms of health systems, especially mental health systems. There's a lot of stigma, not just in society, but especially in a lot of different cultural groups. There's a lot of stigma surrounding mental health and mental health issues and how they should be treated, or even what they are, and a lot of misguidance and misunderstandings, and it makes people more sort of terrified to get help. So, people of color are less likely to get help for their mental health issues because, they've grown up with parents and grandparents who, have certain views and certain stigmas surrounding mental health and mental health issues. And so you get, these generations of people who sort of see mental health as a sort of, if everything is physically okay, then you don't need to worry about your mental health. And that's been, passed on generation by generation. And I can understand where they're coming from because, my parents fled from Sudan and fled from a war. And so to them, being physically safe was the most important thing all the time. And you get people, fleeing countries, and as long as you're physically safe, then you're okay. And, we've made it here, and everyone's, going to school and studying and getting jobs and doing all these great things. So they don't really expect people's mental health to be really an issue that they see, because you've got safety and you've got a house and you've got all these physical things, and you've got food. So like, what else would you need to worry about? And they don't understand all the stress of school and uni and all of these other sort of social concepts that they've now had to learn about coming into the Western society. And so now they're having to deal with these issues that they don't really understand. And their kids can't talk to them because they don't understand what mental health is. So then the kids are sort of trapped and have nowhere to go, and really struggle to get help from the system. And it's a really lengthy process to get help as well. And that combined with the lack thereof, diverse doctors and people who really understand you, it gets even harder to try and seek help. So I think it's been, it's really difficult for a lot of people of color to get help, and to sort of find mental health specialists or mental health professionals that they can identify with, or that can understand sort of their cultural issues and their cultural background and what they've been through. So I think navigating through that is really hard, which is why I decided to go into mental health nursing, because I think it's important for young people that look like me to see someone who looks like me in this space, and to sort of give them the reassurance and the comfort, and to sort of rebuild that trust that has been lost between people of color and doctors, and trying to seek help and navigate through a system that's really, really hard to navigate. Yeah.
So do you think that would be a change to help, like, for people seeking help, is having more people within the workforce or within the industry there to help? Or is it about, say, the young person seeking the help as well? Because say the young person doesn't know what workers may be in that industry, but so how can we get people within the community to go, hey, I need to address my mental health. Yes, my physical health's safe, but now I need to work on my mental health.
It starts with advocates and people like myself, and we are already doing that work. We've got a lot of like other young people, and we do community workshops where we get the older generations and the younger generations, and everyone sort of talks about all the issues, and we sort of go through what mental health is, and just trying to educate the older generations in terms of what to see and why mental health is so important, and how it can manifest into physical things, and it's not always just a mental health, but you know, the stress and anxiety, that stuff can build into physical manifestations that then have an impact on someone's physical health. And so we're already sort of doing the work and going out and training these people, and you know, providing the education and teaching people, and sort of trying to build that up, because we can, you know, we already see that there is a gap, and that there's, you know, that divide, and not much, you know, education in terms of mental health. So we're already trying to get into that space and to try and train up our own communities and build that up.
There's a lot of advocacy work needing to be done. It was great that you're in your role then. Nevo, so you currently facilitate writing workshops. Can you tell us a bit about these workshops?
Yeah, sure. So I facilitate all kinds of writing workshops and have been able to do quite a lot during this time, which is great because obviously work has been really difficult. But I have a friend of mine is another fellow non-binary author, and we, at the start of the year, decided we wanted to run a writing group for trans and gender diverse young people, so people between the age of 13 to 25. And it was actually a young person's idea. There was a 15-year-old non-binary person who spoke to me and said, you know, I want to hang out with trans people, but not just about trans activism. I want to learn skills, and I want to be able to write and to edit and get other people's feedback. And so we took that on board, and we started this writing workshop group that meets every 2 weeks. And obviously COVID happened, and so we moved that into an online space. But we've been doing those workshops online every fortnight since the start of COVID, so since March. And it's been really amazing connecting with young people, and we do all sorts of writing prompts and make different sort of pieces together and then workshop them, and it's free, and you can access it via the City of Melbourne. So if you just look City of Melbourne Trans and Gender Diverse Writing Workshop, that's us. And that's really amazing. We're putting together a zine with all of our writing and different pieces. And I've also been running writing workshops around self-love and self-compassion during this time. Such as like writing letters to your past self, to your future self, writing letters to different body parts and connecting with yourself in that way. That's been really beautiful. I've run some writing workshops on memoir writing and how to access your own story and to come to terms with trauma and authenticity and finding your own authorial voice, and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, running writing workshops during this time has been a true highlight, and having the trans and gender diverse in particular has been such a beacon of hope during this time to get to look forward to seeing all of these young people every fortnight. Yeah, so it's really fun. I enjoy it a lot.
Awesome. So we just got to look up the City of Melbourne Trans Diverse Writing Workshops.
Yep, that's right. Otherwise, it's also on my website, navozisson.com.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to jump to the live questions now. So, Nevo, can you discuss what good examples of allyship?
Yeah, sure. So there's some good examples of allyship in general, and then I can talk about trans allyship. But in general, I think what I said earlier of not appropriating anger and being really patient. I've seen a lot of allies say to people, you know, go Google it. Like, it's not my responsibility to educate you. And it's like, actually, as an ally, it is your responsibility to educate people. It is your responsibility to be patient and to hold their hand through that process, because otherwise that labor and that responsibility falls to marginalized people and the people who you're supposedly an ally of. So I think not appropriating anger, patience, having access to resources and having some really good resources that you can refer people to so that they are still hearing the voices of those people, but without extra labor, I think is really important. When it comes to trans allyship, I feel like, so even just in general, calling yourself an ally is a bit of a fraught thing. Sometimes people call themselves an ally and it's a little bit like having the answer to a maths problem on the page, but not showing any of the working out. It's like the answer is what we want, but we want to know how you got there. And allyship is like, I want to know what you've done to earn that title. Because if you just call yourself an ally because you actively hate trans people, because you're not actively transphobic, that's not enough for me. I need to know what things you've actually done to stand in solidarity with my community. And so calling yourself an ally is not really a self-appointed title. It's much more a title that will be bestowed upon you by the group that you're standing with if they think you've earned it. So I'm not really a big fan of those sort of ally badges or people who call themselves allies. I think it's more important to lead by example through the actions that you're doing rather than the words that you're calling yourself. I think little things like having your pronouns in your email signature, having your pronouns on name tags, introducing yourself with your pronouns is something I really value. When cisgender people introduce themselves to me and say their pronouns, it makes it much easier and more accessible for me to do so, and it doesn't have to come from me all the time. As someone who uses they, them pronouns, I have to say my pronouns to everyone, otherwise I will get misgendered. And so it's really nice when people kind of do that on your behalf as well. I think, using people's correct name and pronouns, and if you do make a mistake with pronouns, just politely correcting yourself and moving on and not making a big deal about it. I think correcting people's pronouns when the trans person isn't around as well is a really big way of displaying allyship. I think putting your money where your mouth is and actually donating ongoingly to trans organisations, and again, that's applicable across the board, like paying the rent on stolen Indigenous land and finding elders and different organisations that you can donate your money to is a really important way of standing in solidarity, I think, with any community. Showing up to our protests, listening to our calls of actions, and actually checking in with activists within trans and gender diverse spaces is a really amazing way. Platforming our voices, paying us for our work. There are so many different things that you can do to be a good and impactful ally. Feel free to follow me on social media, Nuvozison, and hopefully you'll pick up some more tips and tricks as well.
It's a little shout out there. Afi, could you discuss with us what are good examples of allyship as well?
Yeah, I think as an ally, you have to listen to the people that you're, trying to speak. Well, you shouldn't speak for them, first of all. You should be supporting them. So you've got to know where your place is and not to overstep those boundaries, because then, you're taking the voice away from the people who are already, trying to get heard and trying to get their, platform and to get their issues heard. So if you just take over and say, oh, racism is bad and this is bad and this is what we should do and these people are suffering, we need to help them. That's like the white savior complex. We don't need people to help us. We need people to stop being racist so we can then, continue on our merry way. We're very much capable of supporting our own communities, but it's these, obstacles that have been put in our way that make it harder for us to succeed. And I think as an ally, you have to be able to, speak with those people and to actually know what people want and to listen and to support. And, if someone tells you they don't want to talk about something or they're not wanting to raise an issue or, escalate an issue, to be able to listen and to actually stop yourself and to not, speak on people's behalf as Nevo was saying about that anger, like getting angry for someone else, that's not going to help anyone. I've had people be like, oh, this is so racist. I'm so mad. I'm so angry. I'm going to go write to this person and I'm writing a letter to this person and I'm going to sort it all out. And I'm like, thanks. I'll just sit in the corner and wait for you to solve all my problems. Like it's ridiculous. People get these, this white savior complex and they think they can solve all the problems and save everyone's problems and do all these things. But no, we just need people to support us. And, if you have the platform, sharing your platform and uplifting people and giving people opportunities to voice out, all the issues and to talk about their problems and, things like that. And yeah, not overstepping boundaries and not overtaking the conversation, because it's not about you and it's not about how angry you are. It's not about how good of a person you are. And it's just, about giving other people the voice and giving other people the opportunity to talk about their issues and to raise their concerns. And yeah, I think it's really important to make sure you're listening to the other people and not just getting angry and reacting and advocating and doing all this sort of work and not really involving people of color. And I think it's really important for companies and for non-for-profits especially. Like if I see a non-for-profit and it's all like they're trying to help the South Sudanese community or African people or any people of color, and the actual company has like all white people, I would be concerned.
Yeah.
Because how do you know what's good for this community if there's no one from that community within the organization? How are you going to get that insight? How are you going to be able to go into the community to actually help if you haven't got someone who can relate or someone who can make that connection? Then you're just sort of planting yourself in a place that you might not necessarily be wanted, and you're trying to make changes for people and trying to speak for other people. And yeah, I think you just need to listen to other people and to be their support rather than the person that's speaking out and advocating. But yeah, just supporting people and giving them a chance for their voice to be heard.
That's good. I really like that one. So what are your thoughts of a youth organization not having social media?
I think in this time and age, if you're especially a youth organization, you definitely should have social media, because that's how you're going to reach these young people. A lot of young people are on social media, and it also gives them the accessibility, because a lot of youth might not be able to get to places, and if they've got that that access to information, they can learn about things and learn about events and everything online, and they don't have to actually go to places. They can just get the information online, and they can get support online, and they can get all of that help and everything that they need online, rather than going out and trying to get to places. And I think so I think it's really important for youth organizations to have social media and to be active on social media, and updating and engaging with the youth on social media.
Yeah, I think it'd be very important for many youth organisations to do it. YSS. So, Nevo, what do you think of a youth organisation what are your thoughts of a youth organisation not having social media?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what are your thoughts of a youth organisation not having social media?
Of a youth organization not having social media?
Yeah.
I don't know if I have thoughts about that. I don't know if I can speak to that. I'm not a youth organizer, so I think that whatever is applicable for a youth organization is great. I mean, I think in-person meeting and connecting with young people is really important. I think that social media is also a great way to connect with young people. So yeah, I'm not sure I can speak to that too much.
Awesome. Sweet. So thank you everyone and Afi, Nevo, thank you heaps for coming in, joining in from live stream there. It was brilliant having you both. Amazing. I don't know what else much more to say.